Hello, Archie Dunlop here with Talking Astrology with Archie. And in this video, I'm going to be looking at the week starting on Monday, January the 6th, 2025. So I'm going to start this video with a blow-by-blow account of the main events taking place this week, the main astrological events. So, for example, we have a square between Mercury and Neptune, and Donald Trump actually has a square between these two planets in his chart. So I'm going to have a look at this Mercury-Neptune aspect in detail, and have a look at some examples of people who have it, and yes, Donald Trump is one of them. And having looked at Mercury and Neptune and this square between the two planets, I'm going to look at the I Ching for the week, and my I Ching reading for the week will have 4 sections: a general section, then I'm going to look at money, then career and business, and finally relationships. Just a reminder, if you don't want your I Ching done, you don't have to watch the I Ching section of this video. The I Ching section only applies to those who are actually watching it. If you're not watching it, you're not part of it, and whatever I forecast, predict, etc., it doesn't apply to you. So let's look at what's happening this week. Usual reminder, if you happen to like this video, I'd be very grateful if you were to really indicate this, that you like it. If you're not subscribed, I would be extremely grateful if you were to subscribe, because it does make a difference to the channel. So anyway, here is the chart for the beginning of the week. So I set it for midnight, Monday, January the 6th, and I've set it for New York. And so you can see at midnight, the very beginning of the week, Mars is at 0 degrees and 5 minutes Leo. So it's right at the beginning of Leo. And of course, Mars is going retrograde. And that means it's on the verge of entering Cancer. And indeed, on Monday the 6th, Mars goes back into this sign. Mars moves from Leo to Cancer. Now, that sign change, I think in many respects does weaken Mars. Mars is exalted in the sign Capricorn. Therefore, it's fallen in Cancer. Mars doesn't work particularly well in this sign. Mars, okay, it has some mitigation. Cancer is a water sign. Mars rules the water sign. So it's not like Mars has no dignity in Cancer, but it is fallen. And I suppose this might mark a period as Mars, particularly when Mars is retrograde, Mars going retrograde through Cancer. Some of us might feel a sense of powerlessness, that we can't really express ourselves how we like, and we might get rather angry about it. Interestingly, Meghan Markle, she has Mars in Cancer, and I think her Mars in Cancer, because Mars is a male planet, is kind of reflective of Harry. Mars is a military man, someone perhaps who has been in the army, which certainly we know Prince Harry was, but also someone who is brooding. Mars in Cancer, perhaps overly emotional. So that might be how Mars in Cancer is working in Meghan Markle's chart. But it is an important sign change, and people might become more precious about certain things which they claim are important to them. But there is a lot of emotion flying around. And as Mars moves backwards into Cancer, it makes a sesquiquadrate to Saturn. Look, Saturn is at 1456 Pisces. And so, when Mars moves into Cancer, it is straight away sesquiquadrate to Saturn. Mars sesquiquadrate Saturn is a difficult aspect. And I think when I look at what's happening on Monday, I'm going to really perhaps focus on this aspect with a certain amount of detail. There can be a lot of frustration about Mars sesquiquadrate Saturn. Things aren't working well, particularly as Mars is in Cancer. So I think some of us might have to be quite patient. And in terms of the world at large, there is a certain amount of negativity. And of course, Mars and Saturn as a pair are sometimes connected with death and destruction. So that might tell us something about, how we feel about the world, and and also what's going on in the world. And also on Monday's a busy day. We've got Mercury square Neptune. I'll be talking in detail about Mercury square Neptune, so I'm not going to talk about it right now, but you kind of get the picture. Mercury is perhaps about how we express ourselves, can be how we communicate, how we think. With Neptune, maybe there's some confusion, maybe we get the wrong end of the stick, but there is a certain amount of spirituality to that Mercury-Neptune square. But I'll be talking about that in a moment. Then, a bit later in the week, we have got Mercury moving into Capricorn. Mercury starts a week at 26 Sagittarius. That's a very expansive place for Mercury to be on the galactic center at 26, 27 Sagittarius, the galactic center. We start the week perhaps being focused on what is possible and having a sort of universal view of everything, and perhaps wanting to take things further, Mercury in Sagittarius, but then it changes sign. Mercury going into Capricorn, things do slow down. And in many respects, it's quite a good thing that Mercury is moving from Sagittarius to Capricorn, because Mercury is no longer in its detriment. I mean, Mercury is in its detriment in Sagittarius, so when it's in Capricorn, it loses that detriment. And that is a good thing. On the other hand, Jupiter immediately weakens when Mercury moves into Capricorn. Why? Because Mercury and Jupiter start the week being in mutual reception. Mercury is in Sagittarius, sign of Jupiter. Jupiter is in Gemini, the sign of Mercury. So Mercury and Jupiter strengthen each other. But when Mercury moves into Capricorn, Jupiter loses that strength. And so Jupiter suddenly becomes poorly placed. And that might mean that there's a certain amount of pessimism. Some of the world's optimism just dissipates just a little bit, and it doesn't really help that Mercury is also moving out of Sagittarius, and not just out of Sagittarius, but it's also moving into Capricorn. I mean, Capricorn is a very down-to-earth sign, and I think some of us just might have to face reality. But overall, I think Mercury in Capricorn is okay. I mean, it does allow us to be very down-to-earth in the way we communicate. And, Mercury is on the solstice point at Capricorn, so we can pick up on what's happening in terms of the world around us, and we can communicate with that world. So I think that could be a good thing. And then right at the end of a week, we have got Mars trine Neptune. So Mars, of course, is now moving through through the last couple of degrees of Cancer, and therefore it makes a trine to Neptune, which is in the last degrees of Pisces. So, Mars trine Neptune is, potentially quite a spiritual aspect. Mars is what we want to put our effort into. We might want to put our effort into Neptunian things relating to Neptune. It could be art, could be art, could be painting, could be poetry. I mean, in a positive sense. I suppose you can be negative about it. I mean, Mars trine Neptune, just because it's a trine doesn't mean it's good. I mean, it can be, I suppose you could Could be drinking. I mean, if you're into drinking, then I suppose you could drink more. And so alcohol, intoxicants, inebriants should probably be avoided at the end of a week, because it's just easy perhaps to take things too far. But Mars trine Neptune is quite sensitive, and if we have any psychic abilities, this Mars trine Neptune might give them a boost. But earlier in the week we had Mercury square Neptune, and Mercury square Neptune is what I want to talk about. So Mercury square Neptune, Mercury is a planet which really takes on its surroundings. I mean, I sometimes like to describe Mercury as being a bit like tofu, because tofu, I mean, I don't know anything about cooking, but apparently tofu takes on the flavor of whatever is around it. I mean, tofu itself just tastes of nothing, as far as I know. When was the last time I had raw tofu? I don't know. A long time ago, but it doesn't taste of anything. And it just, whatever you throw in with it, it just picks it all up. And so that's like with Mercury. I mean, I know every planet is like that to an extent, but probably Mercury more than other planets. And so with Mercury square Neptune, it does take on something from Neptune. Mercury is about what we say, and I suppose if Mercury is square Neptune, we might find it easy to tell lies. We might get confused. We might not even regard the truth as being particularly important. And at the same time, if we're trying to work things out, Mercury in there's Mercury in Capricorn trying to work things out, trying to be sensible, but it's square Neptune, and square Neptune in Pisces. So there are. Sorry, let me rephrase that. The Mercury is, when it makes that square to Neptune, is of course not in Capricorn. I misspoke. Mercury is of course Mercury in late Sagittarius makes a square to Neptune, and so in this case, Mercury in Sagittarius has big ideas just before it moves into Capricorn, and then it's square Neptune. So some of these ideas might be unrealistic and far-fetched. So we don't want to delude ourselves, and we don't want other people to delude us. I think that's very important. Watch out for deception. I mean, we have to ask the question, who is deceiving who? And we just might believe things which we just shouldn't reasonably be believing, but we are believing them. But still, I suppose if we want to tell lies, if we want to exaggerate, then I suppose Mercury square Neptune might facilitate. But I don't think lying is a particularly good thing to be doing. Now, as far as certain people who have Mercury square Neptune is concerned, I have a couple of people. I didn't want to spend ages and ages looking at loads of people and events. I mean, I did find a few events with Mercury square Neptune, but I don't think I'm going to talk about them. I'm going to just focus on some people. So I talked about Alex Jones yesterday, or was it the day before? Alex Jones, who was famous for his InfoWars, and he is, I suppose, with his Mercury square Neptune, there's his Mercury at 10 Pisces and Neptune at 9 Sagittarius. So Alex Jones, Neptune in Pisces. Mercury in Pisces. Mercury does not function particularly well in Pisces, all things being equal. And it can get confused. It might mix up fact and fiction, and I suppose you could say it might get carried away. I mean, I suppose Mercury square Neptune can be quite persuasive, can have particular narratives which perhaps to his listeners sound very appealing, but are they real? Are they actually based on anything? And I think that is perhaps the problem with Mercury square Neptune. It is potentially a little bit deluded and kind of doesn't know when to stop. And perhaps at times there can be an issue of what is true and what is false, and it's just difficult to sort of work it all out. But I suppose it can give a verbal ability, the ability to be persuasive. But the question is, how is one being persuasive, and is one really able to check what one is saying? And one might be tempted to exaggerate, and I suppose that was perhaps the problem with InfoWars and his legal issues following Sandy Hook. So, in terms of the Sandy Hook event, when all those children were killed in 2012, of course, it was Alex Jones's reporting and what he said about Sandy Hook, which in the end got him into trouble and led to sort of huge financial consequences. So here is the chart of Sandy Hook, this killing of all these children in Connecticut on December the 14th. And although I didn't want to talk about events, I can't help noticing that Mercury was 4 degrees Sagittarius at the time of Sandy Hook, and Neptune was at 0 degrees Pisces. So Sandy Hook was a Mercury-Neptune event. I mean, I suppose it wasn't clear what was going on. Someone was confused, someone was deluded, someone had perhaps mental issues as well as having sort of a homicidal intent. So this Mercury square Neptune was something that Alex Jones, with his Mercury square Neptune, decided to focus on. And it cost him. So that's Alex Jones. And someone else with Mercury square Neptune, I'm not quite sure how this fits together, is Anthony Fauci. So Anthony Fauci, of course, of vaccine fame during the COVID epidemic, he was the expert on vaccinations. I wasn't really following. I wasn't really following Anthony Fauci particularly closely, and I understand that for many people, Anthony Fauci is a real hate figure. I mean, I haven't got into that kind of controversy, but Anthony Fauci does have Mercury square Neptune, and what does that mean? Well, in terms of the medical profession, I mean, I suppose if you think about the specialization, a medical specialization you might associate with Mercury square Neptune, you think of psychiatry. But Anthony Fauci was not, as far as I know, was not a psychiatrist. But I suppose his enemies and critics would say that his advice about vaccines was misplaced, and they would say, well, that is really demonstrated by Mercury square Neptune. But I don't think I've really got anything to say. I'm not a sort of an anti-vaxxer. I always tried to have as many vaccinations as I could, and I'm kind of quite disappointed that I can't get any COVID vaccinations. I kind of miss my COVID vaccinations, but that's just me. I'm just being somewhat perverse. Now, as far as politicians are concerned, if you're in Australia, you may or may not be aware that your Prime Minister, Anthony Albanese, has Mercury square Neptune. So he has Mercury at 19 Aquarius and Neptune at 15, 16 Scorpio. So you could say, if you've got a politician with Mercury square Neptune, given the reputation of politicians, everyone sort of says that politicians are incapable of telling the truth, and I suppose so maybe people who can exaggerate the truth, they know how to spin a good yarn. Mercury square Neptune is certainly going to help, isn't it? And so perhaps he's very, very suited for politics. I don't know about his style of communication. I mean, it's interesting that he has got Mercury conjunct Saturn, but Mercury square Neptune. So, Mercury conjunct Saturn, I mean, in a way, that's quite a nice conjunction, Mercury conjunct Saturn. It is very serious, it's very focused, and perhaps that's helped him in his political career. And then it's square Neptune. So there's a sort of uncertainty there. He's trying to hold on to the truth. He's trying to make things clear, but at the same time, Neptune is there. Neptune is spoiling things. And so with that Mercury square Neptune, however serious he sounds, there may be times when he just gets some of the facts mixed up, and perhaps he tries his hardest, as most politicians do, to sort of distort things and put a spin on things which kind of suits his agenda. Now, the most famous politician at the moment in the world, I suppose, is Donald Trump, and it's sometimes forgotten that Donald Trump does have a square between Mercury and Neptune. It's not an exact square, but he's definitely got it. He's got Mercury in Cancer and Neptune in Libra. Now, it might sound surprising to you that Donald Trump has Mercury in Cancer. I mean, he is a Gemini. He's a talker. He's always got something to say. But I would argue that in many ways Donald Trump communicates through his moon in Sagittarius, because the moon is a communication planet, and he sort of speaks first, sort of thinks about it later, if at all. And with his Mercury square Neptune, that may say something about how he processes information. And I mean, I know that Trump is concerned about some details, but he tends to be focused on perhaps the wrong details. I mean, he gets very focused on, I remember, when he was president, he would, get concerned about who was tweeting what and what particular celebrities were saying, and he getting sidetracked by things which seem to me to be a bit irrelevant. By the way, I'm not making any opinion about Donald Trump. I'm not expressing any view on him. I mean, but I think that Miss Mercury square Neptune does sometimes manifest, and some of the stuff he said about COVID seemed a bit strange. I mean, talking about bleach and how light could destroy COVID and in the body and all this kind of stuff. He sounded a little bit confused at times, and certainly he's not, in terms of administration and bureaucracy, he's not really a details person, I would have said. I mean, he knows there are some details he's really into, but I think the details of government, it's not really his thing. And so that might be about his Mercury square Neptune. And he's a talker, Mercury square Neptune. And through his talking, I suppose to an extent he's spinning away, trying to create a certain impression, Mercury square Neptune. I mean, I think to some extent he is successful at it. And he just talks and people listen. And I think perhaps that Mercury square Neptune has helped him in terms of his political career. Now, another person who has Mercury square Neptune, who I think was kind of using it, was Jeffrey Epstein. So Jeffrey Epstein was a man who I think was very deceptive. I mean, I think he was able to deceive his investors. I mean, he had this reputation for being this hedge fund manager, or this man who was really good with money. I don't actually think he was. I believe he actually wasn't that good with money, but he was able to persuade people to get him to look after their money, and became very rich on the proceeds. In terms of whatever commissions and whatever he took. But he had Mercury square Neptune. So Mercury square Neptune can indeed be very persuasive. And I think Jeffrey Epstein was, and he was very good at bringing people into his web through the power of his words. And I mean, part of that was the fact that he's had Venus-Mars conjunction in Pisces, which is deceptive, but I think it is quite charismatic. But he had Mercury in Capricorn. I mean, very sensible Mercury in Capricorn. I suppose Mercury in Capricorn may suggest his financial abilities or his apparent financial abilities, but it was square Neptune. So that kind of undermined it a bit. And maybe he, in a sense, fell victim to his own lies. But he was certainly very very persuasive. And someone else who was very much into money, was a very successful investor, was well, in fact, before I talk about Jesse Livermore, I want to talk about someone else first who's more in the Jeffrey Epstein thread, and that is the British TV personality Jimmy Savile. So Jimmy Savile was a major British television personality. He had this show, Top of the Pops, which was in the 60s, which was a television show about popular music, and it was kind of a first of its kind. And then he had this thing called Jim Will Fix It, where he'd help children realize their wishes. And then after he died, it was realized that he was a sexual monster and had been just taking advantage of young people, underage people around him, and just left, right, and centre. He was working for the BBC. The BBC didn't seem to do anything about it, and there was again, like Epstein, there was a cloud of just lies and lies, and he was able to get away with it. I mean, he got away with it until he died, and so he had Mercury in Sagittarius square Mercury and Neptune, Mercury in Sagittarius square Neptune in Leo, a dissociate square. So you'd expect if Mercury in Sagittarius to square, make the exact square to 0 degrees Virgo, but Neptune was within 5 degrees of the square of his Mercury was within 5 degrees. So that's another example of someone perhaps using Mercury square Neptune being the ability to deceive, and using it in a way which was very dark and very unpleasant, and was criminal, certainly. So that's perhaps how we can see a connection between Jimmy Savile and Jeffrey Epstein. Now, what I wanted to talk about then was, in terms of money, was Jesse Livermore had a Mercury square Neptune. And so Jesse Livermore was one of the most successful private investors of the 20th century. He made huge amounts of money. His heyday was, I suppose, a period from the sort of 1910s and 1920s up until I think he peaked in the very early 30s, 1929. In fact, with the Wall Street crash on the actual day of a Wall Street crash, apparently he made a fortune because he was shorting stock, and so he had a natural ability to understand the stock market. And he had Mercury square Neptune, so he had Mercury at 10 or 11 Leo. I don't have a time of birth for him, and Neptune in Taurus. But Mercury square Neptune can be too clever by half, and he just never knew when to stop. So his life was always about making a lot of money, pushing trades as far as he could, and then suddenly just losing it all and becoming bankrupt, and pretty much. So he made and lost fortunes on numerous occasions. And finally, in the early 1930s, he finally lost it all, pretty much, and committed suicide. And so that might be how Mercury square Neptune works. I mean, it can be very perceptive, but it can trip itself up. And in the end, come a cropper. In his case, there was a sort of a tragic ending to it. And finally, RFK, he has Mercury square Neptune. Here's RFK's chart. I think I've looked at it quite recently, and his Mercury is 29 Capricorn, and it is square Neptune at 26 Libra. I don't know what one thinks about this Mercury square Neptune. I mean, I think potentially he could trip himself up. There might be questions about his judgment. I mean, I am kind of a little bit worried for him in terms of his involvement with Donald Trump. I mean, is Donald Trump really going to give him what he wants? I mean, I just don't know. I mean, I thought that RFK was originally an environmental lawyer, and as we know, Trump is not a great friend of the environment. So maybe Kennedy is going to be disappointed. Or I suppose Mercury square Neptune, if you were a critic of RFK, I mean, maybe he's the kind of person that people either love him or they hate him. I mean, he's a hard person to hate, but I mean, he certainly has his critics. His critics would say, if you were an astrologer and you were a critic of RFK, you would have said that I suppose you would say that he chases fantasies, some delusions, maybe. If you think that, perhaps some of the conspiracy theories that maybe he's perhaps entertained, but maybe they're not conspiracy theories. I don't know. I mean, I'm trying to be unbiased. I don't really have an opinion on RFK. I mean, I suppose I'm broadly quite favourable to RFK, but I can't help but notice that he does have Mercury square Neptune. I mean, it might relate to his past drug use, maybe, but now that he's he's about to turn 71, isn't he? But so yeah, he does have Mercury square Neptune. So those are a few thoughts about Mercury square Neptune. And now I want to look at the weekend from the perspective of the I Ching. Now, just to remind us, so this I Ching reading is for those of you watching the video. There's about to be a section on the I Ching. If you stop watching this video now, this section does not apply to you. So if you don't want your I Ching to be read, then just stop watching a video. What I say will have no impact on you because it only relates to those watching me and this reading. So here goes. This is my I Ching reading for the week ahead, for the week starting on January the 6th. And this reading will have 4 sections: general, then money, then career and business, and finally relationships. So I asked the I Ching the following question: what is the week starting on Monday, January the 6th, going to be like for those watching the I Ching section of this video? And the first hexagram I got was hexagram 39, obstruction. So this indicates to me that this week might be troublesome. Certainly to begin with, it may be difficult to get anything done. I mean, we might have big ideas about what we can achieve, what we'd like to achieve, but is it really possible? Especially as, beginning of a week, what is the main aspect at the beginning of a week? Well, one of the main aspects at the beginning of a week is Mars sesquiquadrate Saturn. Mars sesquiquadrate Saturn is an incredibly frustrating influence. Mars is about how we want to assert ourselves, how we want to make an impact, and Saturn just slows everything down. And yeah, we can get really, really frustrated. And the general advice with obstruction is that really we can't go forward. So we've got a choice. We can stay where we are and perhaps wait for the situation to improve, or wait for it to get some help, or perhaps we can just retreat, just leave, just go back. There's no dishonor in leaving if the situation just is not going our way. Now, there are two moving lines here. The top line moves and the bottom line moves as well. So with the bottom line moving, again, the idea is that we probably should be retreating. It's certainly not a time for going forward. And we retreat because we've just realized that it's just not the right moment. It's the bottom line. It's too early. And so we thought it was the right time, but no, it's just not working. And I suppose, it is to do with that Mars sesquiquadrate Saturn. So that might be the first thing we plan on doing. And then the top line moves. And the top line is indicating that we don't actually have to move. We might feel that progress is a good thing, that we've got to move forward, that we should never be satisfied with where we are. But with this top line moving, it may be that simply by staying where we are, we're just fine. I mean, we might think that the grass is greener somewhere else, but is this really the case? If we just stay in one place, we can prosper. We can get recognition, and there might be forces from the outside which might actually really appreciate what we're doing, and we might actually have a certain amount of expertise and authority if we are prepared to stay in one place. Now, because you've got two moving lines, that means that the hexagram shifts, and it shifts to hexagram number 37, which is the family. That's kind of interesting, isn't it? Because Mars is retrograding out of Leo into Cancer, and Cancer is a sign which is often connected with the family. And so in terms of staying where we are and keeping our ambitions in check, we can perhaps appreciate what we've got, and perhaps what we've got is our family, the people we're familiar with. Okay, the family might really literally be our family, but it's our group, it's our clan, it's the people we feel comfortable with, and we can stick to their company. So, perhaps in a social sense, we shouldn't be in a hurry to make progress, feel that we need to move on. We've got people around us who are supportive, and so why try to move on when it's not going to work anyway? So and our family are prepared to sort of look after us, they're prepared to root for us, and I suppose we can help them as well. So that is perhaps what we should be thinking about, and perhaps curb some of our crazier ambitions. So turning to money, and the first hexagram is obstruction. I don't know what your plans are, what you're thinking about in terms of money. I do think that if you've got any ambitions financially over the course of the week, particularly the beginning of a week, I think that you should really try to be realistic. So if you're trying to make more money, if you're trying to get someone to pay you money, if you feel you're owed money, it's going to be hard. And you might feel that you should make an effort, but as soon as you make an effort in a financial sense, it just might be difficult, even to just talk to someone about money, getting financial advice, getting someone to tell you what to do, even that might be a problem. So your efforts to make sense of money might be frustrated. And so if you've got financial plans this week, well, maybe you should just shelve them, and you should just perhaps focus on something else. And perhaps you've been planning on spending some money or doing something with money, and you thought that this week was the week to do it, but it's actually more difficult than you realized. It's just not working out. And so it may be best if you just just stop what you're doing and say, okay, you didn't get the timing right. You can perhaps wait for another time when things are better. So financially, you wanted something to happen. It doesn't happen, but the timing was wrong. And perhaps you shouldn't be in a hurry to spend money or I suppose to invest money, but I don't want to give, I'm not here to give financial advice. This channel is for entertainment purposes only. But that might be how one interprets hexagram 39, which is obstruction. And then the top line moves. And with the top line moving, maybe you shouldn't be too dissatisfied with your current financial situation. Maybe your financial situation is fine just how it is. Maybe even your financial arrangements are fine just as they are. Again, I don't want to give financial advice, but I'm certainly not giving financial advice. But very often, the best thing to do with money is not to touch it. I read this. There's this famous statistic, isn't there, that when you've got these stockbrokers and looking at the most successful accounts, and it was said that the most successful accounts, the accounts that do the best, are the accounts of people, either accounts that are abandoned or the accounts of people who are dead. And I suppose that makes sense. You shouldn't touch things. If you touch things, very often I'm not saying you shouldn't touch things. Again, I'm not giving financial advice, but with that top line moving, the top line is actually about staying where you are, not feeling you have to move. I mean, top line in this hexagram does move, and so it just may be that the financial situation as it is fine. The way money has been positioned is fine, and changing something now is not necessarily the right thing to do. So that is a possibility. But again, I'm not giving investment advice here. And this hexagram moves because you've got two moving lines, and it moves to hexagram 37, which is the family. And I suppose, this is talking about money in the context of money. And I suppose you perhaps have to think about your family's money, perhaps, and what your family would like to do with money. And maybe if you've got financial plans, you perhaps need to discuss it with people you trust, like your family. And, with money, it's always difficult to know who to trust, isn't it, with money? I mean, everyone has a motive, everyone has an agenda, but very often one's family, your family can actually be awful, can't they? I mean, that can be the case. They can be actually terrible people in terms of money. But, sometimes the family can be trusted, and talking about money with other members of your family, it can be a good idea to just get agreement or to get some sort of consensus. I mean, I suppose that might be better than doing something on your own, feeling you've got everything sorted out, but maybe you haven't. But something about the family and money may become important towards the end of a week. Okay, not necessarily the family. It could be whatever group you're involved in, whatever clan you're involved in. Then we look at things from a perspective of career and business, and I do think that the week, could have a slow or even a non-existent start with obstruction. Remember, Mars is sesquiquadrate Saturn on Monday, so it's going to be difficult to get anything done. So if you're going into work or you've got a business, you really need to be very realistic, and you're not going to be able to make big advances. Certainly Mars sesquiquadrate Saturn doesn't help. And I suppose it's the new year. Things are a bit slow to begin with. I mean, you'd like things to move. I mean, it's January the 6th, Monday, the first normal week of the new year, but it just, you don't really hit the ground running. And if you want things to happen, it just may take a bit of time. And you do, and timing does matter. And it just may be at the beginning of a week you start to do something, you feel now's the time, but it's not the time, and you realize it's not the time. And I think you've got to be honest with yourself. If you feel something is not working, then just stop what you're doing and sort of retreat. And then the top line moves, and the top line moves is really saying that you shouldn't be over ambitious. You shouldn't really try to work in different places, move, in terms of if you have a business, trying to expand into a new area. I don't think that's a good idea. Do what you're good at and stick to what you know. And do that, and I think that things should be fine. Just don't be over ambitious, and just keep going as you were going before. Just don't feel that you have to make a major move forward. I don't think now is really the right time. And then, because we've got two moving lines, we know we do move to a different hexagram, and we move to the family. And I mean, in this context, you might see the family as being about the group. So if you are working with other people, it's perhaps important to think about the people you're working with as a group. If not a family, then as a clan, or it's just people working together and perhaps having some trust for each other. And that might be the best way to address your working life, whatever your business, whatever you're doing. Though it may also be the case with the family that your family's actions and suggestions do have a bearing on your work, and you can't really ignore them. And it may refer to, for example, to the home work balance and having to balance things out. But I mean, the family is quite a benign hexagram. It doesn't suggest any real problem. In fact, because obstruction moves to the family, it does suggest that as the week progresses, things will get easier. And it may be things will get easier because you're helped by people who you trust, who you can trust. There may not be members of your family. There may be, I don't know, if you're going into work, there may be workmates who you trust, almost like family. Perhaps you've known them for a long time. So I think the week ends, in terms of your work and career, better than it starts. And finally, there is relationships. So relationships could be a little bit trying, especially at the beginning of a week. I mean, after all, we have got 39, obstruction. So it might be that partners, other people around you who you're relating to on a one-to-one level, it just may not really be working as well as it should be. You may feel also that something is standing between you and another person, hence obstruction. And I don't think it's a time for progressing with relationships. So if you're in a new relationship, whatever the nature of this relationship, don't feel you have to go any further with it in the short term. It's best to be realistic, and if you've got any doubts, then perhaps you should hold off. You don't want to pursue a relationship, particularly at the beginning of a week, because if you do, things might not work out, and it may be that there may be a time when you feel you have to get less close to someone. A bit of distance might actually be required. And, what matters perhaps is your own space as well. I mean, the top line moving, the top line is about staying where you are. You must not move somewhere to make someone happy. I think that is important. It's got to be done on your terms, on your territory, whatever the relationship is. It's about making sure that you are respected and you don't have to progress. You don't have to move anywhere. You're actually quite happy where you are. And so stay where you are and just don't feel that you have to compromise yourself or do something just to make another person happy. I do think that that is completely unnecessary. And then we've got two moving lines, and this hexagram obstruction moves to the family. And I suppose that's perhaps telling you about the relationships that matter. It is just focus on the key relationships in your life, and the family sort of represents tradition, the people who are always around you, and it's those kind of relationships that matter. I don't think it's a week for new relationships. It's for a relationship. The focus is on relationships with people you already know and trust, and it's about relationships with members of your family and people who are already very close to you. I don't think that you should be looking for anything new or for relationships which have just started. Do you want them to intensify? No, I don't think you do. So stick to what you know and trust. And that's it. Those are that's my I Ching reading, and that's all I've got to say about the week ahead. This is a preview this week, just remember, and I will be going into detail about some of the things I've been talking about astrologically, over the course of a week. So, in Monday's video, I'll be looking at that Mars sesquiquadrate Saturn and the fact that Mars is, going into Cancer, because I think there's quite a lot to be said about that. Anyway, thank you very much for listening. If you enjoyed this video, I'd be very grateful if you were to like it. If you're not subscribed, I'd be super grateful if you were to subscribe. And if you want to buy me a coffee, there is a link in the description. Anyway, thanks again for listening, and I will talk to you again very soon.